Good afternoon, everyone. Very warm welcome to today's session. My name is Wesley Ibo. I'm the Senior Communications and Engagement Manager for the DARE UK program. And I'm joined by my colleagues here. We've got Hans-Eric Aronson, our Director. Fergus MacDonald is also here, Senior Program Manager. So is Alan Stewart and Michelle Amogi, our program managers, and Abigail England, who just joined us as an intern. So today's discussion is going to be about the UK Community Groups Initiative, where we delve deeper into the crux of the matter, really, the different categories that we've got, requirements for setting groups, available support, and several other things we'll talk about in today's session. So just before we begin, I just want to lay down some house rules, not in an authoritative manner, but just to appeal to our sensibilities. First would be for us to remain muted at all times and only ask a question only unmute if you're invited to ask a question during the Q&A session. And to ask a question, just use the reactions icon down there. If you click on it, you'd see a button that says raise hand. Just use that function to indicate your interest in asking a question, and we'll take your question. Otherwise, you can ask your question using the chat box and during the Q&A sessions. So during the discussion, it's very important that we remain respectful to each other. Don't interrupt anyone, ask questions, and make comments on topic. Very important. And we encourage everyone to keep the videos off during the presentation, but of course, we'd like to see faces when it's time to ask questions and to discuss during the session. So finally, like I mentioned earlier, the session is being recorded just so that people who weren't able to make it to the live session have something to watch later on. So at this point, I will just pass the baton over to Alan Stewart, who leads on this side of things, to take it forward from here. Thank you so very much and enjoy the session.
Thanks so much, Wesley. So yeah, maybe I'll just very quickly run through the agenda for today. So I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes or so talking about what DARE UK community groups are and how you can get involved. And then we're delighted that Hurry Sood from Alan Turing will be giving the case study on the UK Trusted Research Environment TRE community. We're going to save the question and answer and discussion to the end of the session. If there are any immediate clarification questions, we can take those, but it'd be good just to keep those to the end so there's enough time for us to have a good discussion. So just for the context in terms of the question that the DARE UK programme is trying to answer. So this is, how should a national data research infrastructure be designed so that sensitive data can be connected and analysed in a secure, flexible, efficient and sustainable way for public good? So as I mentioned, I'm just going to talk through the DARE UK community groups introduction. So for those who don't know me, I'm Balint. I'm the newest member of the DARE UK delivery team. I joined as a program manager a couple of months ago in May, which was actually a month after the DARE UK Community Group Initiative was launched. So that was in April, and that's what I'll be talking about today. So before sort of getting into it and talking about the DARE UK community groups, I thought it might be useful for us to take a bit of a step back and take some time to collectively think about what we mean by community. So what they are, what different kinds of communities they are, and how things like community size affects their function or cohesion. So in sort of quite a general way initially, and this is partly so that we can, as a sort of very temporary community here today, establish some common ground about what these terms mean to us, but also to set up a bit the rationale for some of the decisions we've made about how we're planning to structure the DARE UK community groups in the way that we have. And I also just want to say right at the outset that we're very much learning by doing here. So we're really keen to keep this conversation as open as possible. and learn as much as we can from you here and in the discussion at the end of the session. So definitely two-way traffic here. So yeah, starting with this fundamental sort of question, in a single word or phrase, describe what makes a community. What are the components? What are the building blocks that you think about? It might be helpful to think about the sorts of communities that you sort of think you're a part of. So many of you have already managed to get onto Slido, so that's great. You can log into Slido either using the QR code here, or you can join at slido.com and join using the code there. Okay, this is great. Sharing, lots of sharing, belonging, common good, inclusivity, collaboration, shared person. I can see this. Okay, people. That's fundamental, isn't it, to communities? I'm also seeing shared quite a lot here. Shared interests, shared purpose, shared values, and I think that's really important. That it is about people, and it is about having something in common that binds that group together. So that's really going to be sort of coming up quite a lot, and there are different things that you can share, such as shared interest, shared identity, and often these things are overlapping. Shared purpose, that's a really interesting one. That's actually one we're going to pick up a lot in the next slide. Okay, that's been great, so that's really useful. I'm going to move on just in the interest of time. We'll be able to come back to these perhaps in the discussion at the end, because I think there's lots of valuable things here. Okay, so I guess there are lots of ideas here, and I think that sort of partly also reflects the fact that communities come in lots and lots of different shapes and sizes. And today we're going to be focusing on a sort of particular kind of community. I'm calling them organized communities. By organized, I mean intentional. So they've got some sort of official membership or affiliation and a shared purpose. So that was a big one that came up in the previous Slido. So yeah, if you go to Slido again, and again, I'm inviting you to sort of put down a word or a couple of words that you think are required for an intentional community, like a Dare UK community group, for example, to be effective. So if you wanted to pull the community around achieving something, what's required? Purpose, excellent. Organization, great. Trust, absolutely essential. Leadership, structure, okay. I'll just give another minute or so. Shared values and culture, that's a really good one, I think, as well. Great, I think that's most of you. Okay, so yeah, I really want to sort of pull out a couple of these things, and we'll be hopefully later in the presentation when talking about the Dare UK community groups and how we've structured them to try and bring out some of these things, that clear goals, yeah, try and bring out some of these things that we think are needed to make them effective. So we'll definitely be coming back to this. Okay, thank you for contributing. So just before I start, so one more thing to perhaps indulge me on. So just before I start talking about more specifically about Dare UK community groups, I did want us to just think about one more thing that might affect how an organized community or an intentional community, like we've just described, that have things like a clear purpose or clear goals, how that community size might affect the sorts of things that it's able to do. So you might think a community would benefit from more members, certainly in terms of diversity, potentially more labour, but perhaps it can also affect community cohesion or alignment around common goals. So how might community cohesion change as a community grows larger? And there is some theory around this. So this is from evolutionary anthropology. So in the 1990s, this chap on the left, Robin Dunbar, I think he was looking at grooming behavior in non-human primates, and he sort of stumbled upon this interesting finding that the social groups, so the size of social groups in different non-human primate species, correlates with brain size. What does that mean? So that means the bigger the brain of the primate species, the larger the average group size. And he suggested that there was some sort of limit, some sort of cognitive limit that provided an upper limit on the number of relationships your brain could literally sustain at any given time. So the graph here is on the right-hand side, sort of illustrates that's just completely made up data here. But it just illustrates the point of this finding that different species of monkeys, their social group size correlated with brain size. And he did a sort of thought experiment or a sort of experiment to put, imagine where humans might lie on this, knowing that we have these larger brains. He could actually put our brain size and then try and infer from that a social group size. So just before, okay, so a quick quiz here again on Slido. What is the estimated number of stable relationships a human is able to sustain at any one time? So this is Dunbar's number. So this is described colloquially as the number of people you would not feel embarrassed about joining uninvited for a drink if you happen to bump into them at a bar. Any ideas? Okay. Leave this open again. I should note that there is some contention about this. Other estimates have got this slightly different. Let's see, what have we got? Okay, 50. Interesting. 50 is the winner at the moment. It's actually 150 is the estimate. And this feels sort of surprisingly low. And of course, it should be noted that many communities and organizations can often number much higher than this. So particularly think about sort of digital communities or sort of corporate organizations, etc. So you don't necessarily need to know or have stable relationships with everyone to operate effectively within a community or an organization. But just worth sort of keeping these things in mind, I thought, when we're thinking about effectiveness or what different sort of communities are best at doing. Okay, so I'm going to shift a bit now. Thanks for all of your contributions to that. So now I'm going to sort of talk about the motivation for the DARE UK community groups. And I thought I'd just start by saying that carrying out research with sensitive data it's a complex business. So you need lots of different people to work together. And this diagram here is a very sort of simplistic diagram that roughly lays out what's involved. And the roles here, the people that are involved here, they're not mutually exclusive in terms of where they land on this. So often they do things at multiple stages during this process. But on the far left-hand side, what you have here is infrastructure, so a trusted research environment. So all sensitive data is, or should be, the consensus now is, if you want sensitive data, it has to be stored securely within a trusted research environment. No trusted research environment, no data. And of course, having this infrastructure requires people to operate them. So I put these down as TRE operators here. So they hold the data. The data is provided by a data provider, and secure access to that data is granted to a researcher by an information governance professional who ensures that the data is being accessed for the right purposes, by the right people, and in the right settings. And then that researcher carries out the research within the TRE. The researcher produces outputs, and ultimately policymakers use those research outputs to inform their decisions. And that ultimately leads to public benefit, which is the motivation for doing all of this work. Now, the landscape is actually a lot more complicated than this because there are lots of different TREs, often holding very different kinds of data. So they're just shown in different colors here. And that's accessed and used by lots of different researchers from different domains, and that can benefit different publics depending on who that data relates to. And I think what DARE UK is really about is this fundamental belief that if we can build connections between these different parts, so if and only if you can securely and in a trustworthy way connect different infrastructures, so TREs together on a systems level, to enable data to be brought together across different domains, so whether that's health or administrative data or survey data, that this will enable research that can cross policy boundaries, and that ultimately this will lead to increased public benefit, so considerable increase in public benefit. And again, this is the motivation for this entire process. And so what we're trying to do, I suppose, with the DARE UK community groups is try and nurture and support connections both between people involved in these different critical roles, so bringing TRE operators from across the landscape together to work on shared problems, but also between or across the different roles, because all of these different people are required in this process. And as I said, often these individuals have roles at other stages in the process. So members of the public should also be involved, for example, in the research from the outset, so that they're not just beneficiaries, but they are also involved throughout the research cycle. Okay, so now that's the sort of motivation for the community groups, and now I'd sort of want to talk about what they actually are. So they're modeled on the Research Data Alliance community group. So these are it's essentially an open invitation for individuals to submit proposals that align to the DARE UK visions and objectives. And we'd like to support these communities to come together. So how can we do this? And we can think back to some of those ideas that we put down around what makes a community group effective. So one of the things that we saw was that there needs to be a common or specific purpose. I think there were shared goals there. And to form a community group, therefore, we have a community charter, and that basically sets out the specific objectives of the group and how the group will, how the group will work together to achieve those objectives. There needs to be clear rules and expectations. So there is code of conduct as well that you must subscribe to. Leadership and organisation, that was also two of the biggest things that came out of the Slido earlier. And in order to coordinate community group activities, there needs to be some form of leadership who are identifiable and motivated to coordinate the community. So we have a system of co-chairs where a number of people essentially elect themselves to co-chair the community group. And we also really want all of the outputs from these community groups to be published openly, so in a transparent way. And this sort of provides an open door for communities to form and engage with the DARE UK programme. Okay, so there are actually a couple of different community groups that you can propose to form. The first is interest groups. So these are focused on solving a specific sort of problem area in the sensitive research and infrastructure domain. So they're open-ended in terms of how long they can run for. And these interest groups can and probably should span smaller working groups. So that's shown in number 2 here, to address particular pieces of work. So this essentially keeps the interest groups sort of broad-based and the working groups focused on much smaller, more tractable problems. And these working groups, so as I said, they're focused on producing very specific outputs around very well-defined problems. And that could be, the outputs could be things like recommendations or some code or metadata schema or an academic publication. And I guess if we think back to our sort of discussion on Dunbar's number and group size, you can imagine a group of several hundred strong to be involved in an interest group that, say, organises quarterly meetups among the community to discuss sort of a broad-based issue, versus much more focused working groups that might not involve more than a couple of dozen members producing a very well-defined output. Okay, so what's the process for becoming a DARE UK community group? So we have a charter, an interest group or a working group charter that's downloadable from our website. And as I said, these charters outline the specific objectives of the group and how the group will achieve those objectives. Also inviting the group to look at other groups that are working in this area. That is then completed and then reviewed by the delivery team. So that's the small team of 6 of us that Wesley introduced right at the beginning. This goes to our operational management group, who then review the proposal, and each of these phases takes about 2 weeks. So we're looking about a month turnover. And finally, having jumped through those hoops, the interest group or the working group is endorsed. And so it is a bit of work to put forward a proposal for a DARE UK community group, but we hope that it's worth it, because if you are working in the sensitive data research infrastructure space, we do want to support the communities to be more effective. So we're offering some support in the terms of sort of secretariat support for administering community groups, comm support, so particularly around promoting any community group events on the DARE UK website and on social media, and inclusion of any outputs or key developments, milestones in our monthly newsletter and other comms channels. We're also offering website presence, and I'll talk about that in a second, and also some funding to support events. So things like room hire and catering costs for meetups of the community or for conferences. So that's the support that we're looking to offer. In terms of the website presence that I mentioned, so we're still figuring this out, but what we'd like to do is pilot something along the lines of what the Research Data Alliance offer their community group. So that's essentially a listing on the website, and then potentially along with that listing and description of the community group sort of broad aims and interests, sort of different buckets that brings together essentially the outputs of the community group. So the idea here is that members and co-chairs this can help sort of coordinate the activities of the community group, organizes community groups in a consistent way across the different Dare UK community groups, and enables better join up between them, and also to maximize the impact of any outputs that the community groups produce. Okay, I just want to finish by saying that our community groups will just be part of an already sort of complex and thriving ecosystem. So there are lots of community groups and organizations working with communities in the sensitive data landscape already. And these logos here are just a fraction of what's out there, both in the UK and in the EU and beyond. I think it's fair to say this area is growing, and we do want to be able to accommodate that growth where it makes sense to do so, but we definitely want to simplify and not complexify wherever possible and not duplicate effort. So we'll be looking to signpost people who come to us with ideas for community groups where we think one already exists. And in terms of, as I said at the beginning, in terms of this community group work, we're very new in this space and very much learning by doing. So many people, including some on this call, will have more experience than us doing this. So we're really keen to hear from you and take away any lessons you might have learned as a funder or community group organizer around best practice for making these sorts of things work best. So please do get in touch. One of the community groups that's on here, so the UK TRE community group, as I said during the introduction to the agenda, we'll be giving today's case study. So they're currently in the process of gaining their UK endorsement, and Hurry will be talking about this community and their work to you very shortly. So this is also an invitation for you to submit proposals for community groups. So as we look towards phase 2 of the Dare UK programme, we do see a crucial role for these community groups in shaping what that looks like. So we're really keen to hear from you in the community around your ideas for setting up interest groups, working groups to address problems within this space. Okay, so I will stop there. If there are any burning clarification questions, I can take them now. Otherwise, I will hand over to Hurry, who will tell you a bit about the UK TRE community.
I'll give it 30 seconds for questions before I start, in case anything comes up.
We'll have plenty of time at the end for discussion as well. So,
sweet. I think that's the right screen. If I do that, is that right? Is it a slide that says UK TRE community?
looks
Awesome.
good, Hurry.
So hi everyone, my name is Hurry. Like when you go somewhere quickly, you're in a hurry. Sorry if you already know me and have heard that thousands of times already. I am a research application manager at the Alan Turing Institute. So my role focuses on finding sort of real world impact and use cases for Turing's research. And I work as part of our data safe haven, which is like a term for TRE's team at the Turing Institute. And also with Simon Lee, who I believe is on the call, have helped establish the UK TRE community, which, as Bannon mentioned, we are going through the process of becoming a Dare UK community group at the moment as well. So this is sort of a broad overview of what we've been doing so far. We are quite informally run and very grassroots and don't have anyone working full time on this at the moment. So that might be reflected in these slides. If there are like terms and concepts that aren't making sense, please just like put them in the chat. If I'm not being clear on what things mean, please let me know. I'm happy to take like clarifying points and questions and stuff as we go. So this, will be a broad overview of the community and thinking about, especially given these this opportunity to become a DARE recognized interest group, what that can mean for us going forwards. So we started at RSECon for 2022. So RSE is Research Software Engineers Conference. And it was actually Simon who wanted to bring together people working in the TRE space at RSECon to discuss best practice, shared knowledge, all that kind of stuff, and set up a TRE satellite event and this was September 2022. And we helped organize it. And what came out of that event was there's a lot of energy in this room. There's a lot of knowledge here. There's a lot of thoughts to share. We shouldn't just have this one event once per year and then not do anything with it, but we should set up some kind of community out of this that takes ongoing work forward, meets more regularly, all that kind of stuff, has that shared vision, shared goal, shared purpose across teams in the TRE space. And we're kind of focusing, and we'll see in a second, on this open source infrastructure, on collaboration, all that kind of stuff. And recently, we renamed ourselves to be the UK TRE community. And the main reason for that is, as we've done more work, both in our teams and in the community, we've realized that there are way more people that are impacted and involved and affected by TREs than just engineers building them. There's patients, there's members of the public, there's operators, there's users, there's strategic bodies, there's funders, all that kind of thing. And so we wanted to rename ourselves to sort of include everybody we want to be involved in the community and the conversation. The big thing to say, as I alluded to, it's grassroots, it's quite informal at the moment, and it is still very flexible. So if you're interested in what we talk about today and want to get involved and want to help steer the direction we're going in, our priorities, all that kind of thing, we're completely open to that. And we're really wanting to make sure that we do what is representative for people in the community and don't have hugely formal structures that are really hard to change things with. It's almost like, come and tell us what you think and what you'd like to see us do, and we can start doing it. So we end this meeting in September. We wrote what we called the Newcastle commitment, because the meeting took place in Newcastle, which is, we call it a commitment manifesto, all this kind of thing, which is a one-page document on what we stand for as a community. We won't go through it in detail now, but the principles of the document are working out in the open, collaborating across TRE teams to share knowledge and best practice, and across expertise in diverse skill areas as well, to try and standardize towards some kind of common approach to TRE provision in the UK, and also just to bring together people working in the TRE community in the UK and also beyond, because we've had some people join from beyond the UK as well, to be part of the conversation. And what we say to people joining the community is, as long as you're happy with the Newcastle commitment, please get involved. And we are completely open to anyone from any kind of background, skill set, interest. As long as they're happy with the Newcastle commitment, then they are, and you are more than welcome to join. So we have some loose ways of working at the moment. We have quarterly meetings. So we have that one in-person / hybrid meeting once a year for September, and we do have one coming up, which I will shamelessly plug in a little bit. And we also have 3 online meetings that have been running, mainly from an accessibility standpoint. When you have a distributed community all across the UK, it's a lot easier to have things online. We also have set up working groups. So we have 4 working groups at the moment. We'll go into a bit more detail in a minute: open source TREs, funding and sustainability, information governance, and community management. And the idea behind those is to, again, not just have meetings where we meet, have a chat, say, this is all great, then do nothing for a few months and have another meeting, but try and have some kind of ongoing community progress in there as well between those meetings. And yeah, we've seen some pretty good organic engagement, especially as a quite informal community. We've got a mailing list of just over 70 people. We have a Slack channel with just over 70 people on as well. We've had 30 to 40 people come to each of our community events, and we're hoping to increase that as we get more people involved. And we're all still totally within the Dunbar number, so we know everyone that's involved and have a thriving community within that. I think one thing that we think with our work is, as we want to be as open as possible to people, we're happy to have a very big community. And then if we get to that stage, we can think about like what different focus areas there are within that represent the needs and wants of everyone within the UK TRE community. So, thank you, Simon, for sharing the Newcastle commitment. So on the quarterly meetings, again, I won't go into too much detail about the ins and outs of what we've covered, but we have these what I like to call keynote presentations. And I say to anyone who gives them, please feel free to reference it as a keynote presentation, which is bringing the community who come to the calls and share afterwards as well, up to date with like core developments in the TRE space. So initially we got the team from Dare UK involved about the program and what they're trying to achieve. We've had Seb Bacon, who's a CTO of the Bennett Institute, come to talk about open safely in their models, and also Simone Croft, who's representing the NHS SNSDEs, to just share knowledge with the community and make sure that by the end of that talk, we know that everyone involved in the community has broadly the same level of knowledge within these big developments. We also have these project workshops, which we liken to group problem solving on key issues facing specific project teams. So a project team can come to the workshops and say, hey, we're really struggling with this specific topic at the moment. Can you help us solve it? And we find in the TRE space, there's a lot of people who face a lot of the same problems and are doing the same work. And if we can come into this space and sort of group problem solve, it makes this work a lot easier, quicker, more efficient, all that kind of stuff. Some topics that have been covered in those are things like cost recovery for TRE infrastructure provision, whitelisting software packages within a TRE to ensure that they're all safe to use, and how to do effective user experience testing within your TREs as well, and many more. And we also have these sort of more general breakout discussions, which are not project specific, but are more broad themes of discussion that it'd be good to just get the community thinking about and talking about together in these spaces. So things like, should we classify data using a tier level or not? Like, how many different TRE architectures are there, and should we be trying to standardize them? What should be our standards of federation, and what are we trying to do this for? Is it like user access? Is it data? All that kind of stuff. Again, I'm not going into too much detail now. I think the main thing that we're trying to do with these meetings is, again, not just have a chat, but make sure that within these, say, project workshops, the team is getting some action points and some things they can work on afterwards. Within these breakout discussions, we always have 5 minutes at the end to say, okay, based on the stuff we talked about, what's going to happen next? Like, how do we take this forward? How do we make it fit within our working groups? All that kind of stuff. Also, Ben, I'm not checking the chat, so if there's something to clarify, please just like let me know and jump in. So on the working groups, as I mentioned, open source and open standards is looking at promoting open standards within the TRE infrastructure space. Community management engagement is basically just making sure that we're managing this community. It's very meta as a working group within the community for making sure the community is working effectively for everyone and engaging all the right people. Funding and sustainability is thinking about, and this came out of conversations we had as a community, thinking about how to sustainably provide the funding and resources needed for the realization of TRE infrastructure into the future. And information governance is that big question of what is the sort of governance piece that sits alongside the technical implementation of TRE infrastructure. These working groups were chosen by the community, and we review them each quarterly meeting to say, are these still the priorities for the community? And if not, what needs to change with them? And then we're trying to formalize that a bit more to say, okay, now we've got this working group, what are we doing with it? There's a chair, again, there's a mess of terms here because we're not quite yet a Dare community group, so don't have the shared language yet. Within these working groups, there's a lead, is what we call it, who is tasked with setting up meetings and driving a bit of work within these working groups and reporting back on it in our quarterly meetings. An example of this is each group now has a one-pager that is live on our Reader Doc site, which Simon potentially has shared already or can share. And this is an example from the funding and sustainability one, which is led by Fergus and from Dare and Davida the Turing, and thinking about, okay, what are we going to focus on within this working group, and what are we going to commit to delivering? And I think these are really cool and exactly the kind of thing we're looking for. But like in this group, we want to deliver on these pieces of work, a position paper, a costing model, or charging cost recovery models that we can share with the community. And that's the kind of thing we're trying to do. So if you want to get involved and want to be involved in one of these working groups, please have a read through them on our site and just get in touch. There's an email on each of those pages saying who you can get in touch with. We also have, the Read the Doc site. We have an open GitHub repository, which is here on the right, mainly documentation at the moment that anyone can contribute to and use. There's a Slack channel, and there's also, we'd say the JISC mailing list is probably the most like easy way, sort of like level 0 way to get involved in the main way we communicate with the community. I will share these slides afterwards and share links as well. Simon potentially is also sharing them in the chat, which would be awesome. Please do sign up and get involved. And kind of similar to Balint is that, well, talk about all these different communities that exist in the space at the moment. Like we have ourselves with our meetings, our working groups, there's all these other communities, there's all the work Dara is doing both with these interest groups and just as an organization within the TRE space. And teams are already busy with their full-time jobs, and like members of the public are busy like with their lives for this interest area. And so how are we working and what are we doing to fit in with this effectively? I think we see this community really primarily focused on like bringing people together and figuring out like what we can all do together effectively, rather than like being the one place that does everything. It's much more like we have SDAP, we have these NHS higher education working groups, we have members of the public. How do we connect all this effectively and actually get people sharing knowledge and talking with each other and all that kind of thing? And so the sort of ongoing questions for us at the moment are taking this community forwards. How do we, like I said, bring together and link up all the energy in this space effectively? The people in this space are really impressive and really cool and really engaged. So how do we harness all that energy to bring everyone with us? What resources and support do we need to thrive? So at the moment, we have no funding and no formal operational structure, all that kind of stuff. And I think there's, as we've grown and got bigger, there's a need to think about a slightly more formal operational governance structures and resourcing, especially financially, for people to work on this a bit more directly than just in their free time. Yeah, like I said, how are not just teams, projects, and communities all connected to each other, but are they representative of everyone who's involved or affected by TREs as well? Because it's not just technical people, it is also people whose data is being used inside TREs. It's people who have to carry out research inside TREs. It's potentially data protection officers who have to ensure that all the research happening within their organization inside a TRE is safe and all that kind of thing. So is the community representative and catching all of those needs and desires to drive TREs forward in the right way? And then the question is, there's so many people that already exist, RDA, SDAP, the Turing way. So what are the best practice, kind of what this call is about, what is the best practice for running a community that we can learn from to do this effectively? I am just going to plug this. I think this is my last slide. We have our next in-person hybrid meeting. So the morning will be hybrid and many presentations, and all the breakout discussions will just be in person. Is happening on Monday, the 4th of September at Swansea University. It is all day from 10 till 5:30. It is completely free to attend. And what we're aiming for this to be is the biggest meetup of the UK TRE community to date. So failure mode for us as a community is if people involved in the TRE space in the UK haven't heard of the event. We totally understand that not everyone can make it, but as long as everyone knows that it's happening and is aware that the community exists, that's what we're aiming for. So please do make it if you can. I will say, just as a caveat, this will be slightly more potentially technical, or we kind of expect those attending to have a sort of baseline understanding of what TREs are and how they work, to be able to engage fully within the day. And we hope to do more very ground up events in the future. But please do come if you can make it. Again, I'll share these links, or share the Eventbrite link as well. And I think that's it. I hope that was the right tone and content. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks so much, Harry. That was great. We've got 15 minutes left. There have been a number of questions in the chat, clarification questions. I feel like quite a lot of those have been addressed in the chat. If do put your hands up and ask away if one of these hasn't been addressed. Do we have any questions? I might start with one for you, Harry. You've been sort of quite energetic with the TRE community and what started as the TRE community. I'm just wondering if you could just sort of reflect on the things that have worked well, maybe, or things that you've been surprised at that have gone very well, or any like particular challenges you've had, and how you might be supported better to overcome some of them.
Sure. And I will also say, if I know there's some people from the community on the call as well. So if you guys have thoughts that I don't share and want to share them as well, please do. So I think it's definitely been a learning experience. I think so it started kind of as a like professional community with the RSC TRE. It was very focused on like we all kind of work in this space, and what can we do to support each other and working in it. As it's growing, is thinking a lot more about we kind of just care about this issue a lot more as people, and we're trying to involve people who don't necessarily work in the space as well. So how do we soften it from being very professional to much more inclusive for everyone, which comes with its own challenges. And I think mainly it's a big resourcing question to think about how to provide that space effectively for all these different groups of people. I think maybe the events we've been running have been attended by a certain demographic and like stakeholder group of people, and thinking about those like representative events is a big one. I think a key learning for me within like the community space, I'm also a philosopher, so please tell me if this gets a bit too philosophical, but we started very much on like what can we do to set ourselves up to take actions forward with these working groups with next steps each time, so like really making this progress. I think what's been difficult with that is that no one's working on this, no one's paid to work on it, everyone's trying to fit it into their free time, especially in their work time, but everyone already has full-time jobs. And so we didn't initially necessarily see that much progress in the working groups, but the community was still getting stronger. And I think the sort of what I call it, the ritual of having that regular meeting where actually we're just trying to bring people together and having like a cadence of, okay, we're all going to come back together and be in the same room again, sharing thoughts, sharing ideas, sharing knowledge, has just been really valuable and is almost like an end goal and a measure of success in itself. Because I think from that, we've seen teams collaborate on applying and getting funding, on like sharing ideas, sharing resources, sharing knowledge independently of the community. And so a big learning was it doesn't necessarily need to be tagged with, oh, this is all coming out of this community and the work is associated with it. It's almost like provide the space, structure it to say how great is it to be able to knowledge share and learn from each other, and then sort of things happen around that as well. So learning the importance of ritual, I guess, is the short answer on that.
That's interesting. So some of these things are almost some of the benefits come out accidentally as a result of just making those connections between people.
Yeah, and I think we've been, and Simon can allude to this as well, we've really been trying to be driven by like what the community wants to do, but also can do. And I think, like I said, there's a lot of energy and people want to do a lot, but people are very busy. And so it wouldn't be right for us to be like too forceful on, okay, you have to deliver this by then, even though you're doing it for free and you're already stressed and underfunded. It's much more like, if you can do this, cool. And then that allows us to see like maybe where capacity is, where people see it as more fundamentally part of their job, and take it on. And I think that's then allowed this like very open, inclusive space to exist. It doesn't feel like you have to perform to be there. It's very much like, I'm part of this community. I want to be able to share my thoughts. I can.
Thanks, Harry. Any other questions from the floor? Either about sort of their UK community groups generally, how you can get involved, or the UK TRE community? Farzana.
Hi, I'm a PPR representative. I put it in the chat, and I want to further participate. I don't know if you can answer this question as we speak now. I want to know how can I participate? In what ways? Will it be a face-to-face or online meetings? And how does it go? How does it move forward from there?
Yeah.
Are you talking about the UK TRE community or just sort of community groups in general?
The UK, yeah.
Okay, I'll give that over to Harry.
Cool. Yeah, thank you very much for that. So at the moment, and there's some links in the chat. I'll share the slides as well, it has all the links on it. The best thing to do is sign up for our mailing list. That's just pretty much where we share like all updates on what events we're running, what opportunities there are for people to get involved, all that kind of stuff. And pretty much say that's the core way that we communicate with the wider community. At the moment, we are pretty much just working on the quarterly events. So we invite everyone to the quarterly events. People can submit topics to discuss and lead on all that kind of stuff for those events. The next one being September, then it'll be December, March, June. and those 4 working groups. So I can send you a link to those working group summaries. If you're interested, there's a person you can contact who leads that working group on it at the moment as well. Again, going back to the we're very flexible thing, if you hear that, you're like, actually, if this is going to be the UK TRE community, I really think that we should be working on that and I'd want to work on that, then please come talk to me and we can figure out how to make it happen.
Brilliant, thank you.
Or talk to me or Simon or anyone else in the community in case they also want to be involved in those conversations.
Can I pop in 2 words?
Yeah.
Laurie Mosley here. I'm an emeritus prof these days, so although I'm active in research, I don't do much direct teaching, but I'm quite surprised at how few people at the moment seem to get undergraduates using any secondary data. I seem to be more concerned with teaching them to go out and get new data. Somebody must have surveyed this. Are you aware of anything though?
I think I'm not an expert on this, but I think one of the challenges is gaining access to this data takes often quite a long time. And so it depends on sensitive data. Other forms of secondary data, that probably the access processes are easier. So that often provides a bit of a barrier to get to allowing undergraduates to access and use secondary sensitive data, simply because you have to be an accredited researcher to access it. You have to fill out a project application form, etc. Yeah, I'm not aware of any surveys that have looked at this systematically, but that's just one of the barriers that I'm aware of.
Okay, thank you. But it's just that I use the UK data service quite a lot for non-sensitive data, although that can get very deep. We've got lots of stuff, for example, on biomarkers, which we're analysing at the moment, and obviously they're not identifiable to individuals. And that's the important step there. But my concern is that many students seem not to being exposed to secondary data of any kind at all. And there's something like 10,000 data sets at UK Data Service just waiting to be analysed. And they could become part of the normal curriculum. But as far as I know, they are not generally. And I just wanted to find out if anybody is doing that. I'll turn my mic off now.
Thank you, Lawrence. There was a question here from Helen about other interest groups that we're supporting. So this, we've only just very recently opened up to the community to ask for proposals. So the UK TRE community is going through the process. There's also one in the pipeline from Rob Baxter, who's the DARE technical lead, with in collaboration with the Crick Institute, looking at sort of federation services. So how could a federated sort of core service operate to connect up TREs? Those are the 2 that are currently sort of in the process, shall we say. But we're very much keen to open this up and invite you all to sort of submit proposals around the issues that matter to you, I suppose.
So sorry, just as a follow-up then to that, thank you for that, Balint. So for example, just thinking about common areas of interest that cross over between different networks, for example, the TRE network with what ESTAP is, which is the Secure Data Access Professional Networks. So obviously I'm thinking maybe there's a common potential for an event of some kind. And I take on the board the point you were making, Harry, earlier about the particular focus of the Society for Research Software Engineers, which is quite technical. And I've noticed that with ESTAP in the last certainly 12 months, we've started to see a little bit of kind of blurring a little bit at some of the edges of the kind of members that are coming to us, or specialists that are interested in joining ESTAP. And one of those growth areas, it's very marginal, we're talking about 3 people, they have much more of a technical focus. So I sort of think maybe there's potential there, and if so, if there, obviously it would depend on discussion, and it would also involve checking in with the ESTAP steering group. But I'd be curious to know if there'd be funding for that from yourselves at DARE and in the future for a one-off event, or are you thinking of the TRE? Well, what you're interested in supporting is really about a network, or I'm just thinking about one-off events, basically.
Yeah, we do have funding to support one-off events. Yeah, so there is funding to support that. And like I mentioned, secretariat support for community groups and interest groups, but you don't necessarily have to be a Dare UK community group to get some funding for an event if that event is aligned, as it serves a useful purpose that's going to take the Dare UK programme forward. So bringing together SDAP with the RSE community sounds like an eminently sensible thing to do. So that would certainly be something that we could talk about.
That's fine. We'll just look at this, where, you know, what strategic objectives it hits then in terms of your funding. That's absolutely fine. Thank you.
Fergus.
Yeah, afternoon, everyone. I mean, maybe just as a follow on to that, and I see James has just put a question in as well around funding. I mean, a little bit the initiative is also behind trying to encourage the community to come together and then show a need for potentially funding events, potentially resourcing of different things, and recognizing that community building and maintaining strong communities to sort of carry a vision forward requires effort and resource. And so we're in this weird catch-22 where, you know, we don't really know what's needed. And so we need people to come forward to show what's needed so we can provide what's needed. And obviously thinking a bit towards phase 2 here of DARE. But it's sort of that strange place where we're not exactly sure what to give yet or how to give it, because there isn't really, the needs aren't being surfaced and the challenges and sort of where do we actually need resource and what makes sense, right? So we're in a look, and that's why this invitation is out there. This is really a call to, you know, all of you on the call and your networks, everyone else to say, well, what should these communities look like? And then what kind of support do they need to be successful? Because we're not pretending like we know this. We don't know all the answers, right? We're sort of calling on your support as well to help us.
Could I just quickly come back to that? Because I was struck by what you were saying, Harry, because that's exactly, you know, you're making the point again about volunteers. And I think that's something that we've experienced again, inevitably within SDAP. And so I'm just wondering about, have you done research into this, Fergus, about needs in terms of these groups? I don't want to put you on the spot, but I just wondered if you've done research, or maybe that might be something to consider, sort of quick fire research into finding what the issues are, because that catch-22 is something that we've definitely experienced within SDAP.
The short answer is no, but it's an interesting idea. I mean, it's an interesting idea. I'm sort of thinking about it on the spot as you've said it.
Okay.
But the short answer is we haven't sort of done any research, or let's say any formal research into it.
Okay.
Whether we should, or, you know, we could potentially do that. We could sort of discuss if that's a good idea. Maybe we can have a think about that. It's an interesting idea.
Okay.
See, James has got his hand up as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so Diana in the chat has raised a couple of very interesting questions around funding. And I think the fact that we don't have funding, so we're not saying we don't think funding for people to attend these events is not important. We don't have funding because we're a self-organized group, and we sort of came together as people who were interested in this space, rather than sort of applying initially for research funding to do this kind of thing. And, you know, this effort to become a DARE community group, like, maybe will make it easier in the future to fund people to come to these events. But yeah, like that, this is why there's this, you know, funding and sustainability interest group, because we recognize that this is a really, really important thing, and we need to find solutions for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. It's a work in progress. Okay, we are bang on 1 o'clock. So maybe I'll just thank you all for coming and for all your interesting and helpful contributions. Do get in touch. We will, of course, are happy to share slides, and this has been recorded as well. So so very happy to do that. And thank you all for coming. Get in touch.